The first brick through our living room window arrived exactly 7 minutes after I installed the hand-carved wooden sign reading Winslow Estate at the entrance to our driveway. I was still admiring my handiwork when I heard the crash, followed by my wife Catherine's startled scream. The note wrapped around the brick was printed on expensive letterhead. Remove unauthorized structures immediately, or face legal action. Oakwood Estates, HOA. Welcome to retirement in paradise. I'd spent 30 years developing properties across the Midwest, building communities from the ground up, transforming empty fields into neighborhoods. When Catherine and I finally decided to settle down, we chose a 5-acre plot just outside Oakwood Estates, an exclusive gated community in Northern Virginia. The attraction was simple: beautiful countryside, privacy, and most importantly, no homeowners association to dictate what color I could paint my mailbox. Or so I thought. "Jack, they can't do this," Catherine said, carefully picking glass shards from the Persian rug her grandmother had left her. Even at 64, with her silver hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, she radiated the same fierce competence that had made her one of DC's most respected corporate attorneys before her retirement. "This is criminal damage. We should call the sheriff." I picked up the brick, turning it over in my hands. "And tell him what? That the upstanding citizens of Oakwood Estates are throwing tantrums because I put up a sign on my own property? It's assault, Jack. It's a warning shot." I set the brick on our coffee table. "And I want to know exactly what we're dealing with before we escalate." The next morning, I drove out to examine our property line again. Our land sat just beyond the pristine borders of Oakwood Estates, where homes started at $3 million and featured the kind of architectural uniformity that only vast wealth can disguise as individuality. The only access to our property was a quarter-mile stretch of paved road that branched off from Oakwood's main drive, cutting through a small wooded area before reaching our land. I'd reviewed the property maps extensively before purchasing. This access road wasn't part of Oakwood Estates, but a separate easement that provided a right-of-way to our property. At least that's what our real estate agent had assured us. As I approached the junction where our access road met Oakwood's main drive, I spotted a glossy black Range Rover parked on the shoulder. A woman in her 50s, immaculately dressed, in what I recognized as casual clothing that probably cost more than my first car, stood beside it. She was supervising two men in matching polo shirts as they installed a heavy metal gate across the access road. I pulled up and rolled down my window. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" The woman turned, her smile practiced and cold. "Mr. Winslow, I presume. I'm Victoria Harrington, president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association." She approached my truck with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. "We're installing a security gate to protect our community's integrity." "Across my access road?" "This is Oakwood property, Mr. Winslow. You have an easement for access, which we're respecting. You'll be provided with a key code." Her smile tightened. "But we need to address your recent additions. The sign, the decorative stone entrance pillars you're constructing. They don't conform to our community standards." "I'm not part of your community. Your access road is." Victoria handed me a thick envelope. "This contains our architectural guidelines and a formal notice of violation. You have 7 days to remove the unauthorized structures." I didn't take the envelope. "Show me where it says you have jurisdiction over my property." "The access road falls within our boundaries, Mr. Winslow. Any modifications to it or structures placed along it require HOA approval." She placed the envelope on my dashboard. "I should mention that fines accrue at $250 per day per violation." I laughed. "I'm not in your HOA. You can't fine me." "We can restrict your access for violations." Victoria's smile never reached her eyes. "I strongly suggest you read the documents and comply. It would be a shame if emergency services had trouble reaching your property because of technical difficulties with the gate. That's when I realized this wasn't just petty bureaucracy. It was a threat. Is that what the brick through my window was? A technical difficulty? Victoria's expression didn't change. I have no idea what you're talking about, Mr. Winslow, but Oakwood Estates is a peaceful community. We intend to keep it that way. As she walked back to her Range Rover, I noticed one of the workers photographing my truck's license plate. They don't own that road, Catherine said that evening, poring over our property documents spread across our dining table. After 30 years practicing corporate law, my wife approached problems with methodical precision. The easement is clearly established in the original development plans. They can't just gate it off. They already did, I replied, rubbing my temples. I'd spent the afternoon removing the stone pillars I'd started building. Not because I acknowledged their authority, but because I wanted to understand what I was up against before picking this fight. And tomorrow they're sending a landscaping crew to remove my sign. Let them try. Catherine's eyes flashed. That would be trespassing and destruction of property. We'll have them arrested. And then what? We become the pariahs who got their neighbors' landscapers thrown in jail? This is about more than a sign, Cat. They want us gone. The truth was, I understood territory wars. In my decades developing properties, I'd seen how communities circle the wagons against perceived threats. To Oakwood Estates, we were outsiders who'd slipped through a loophole. People who got to enjoy the prestige of the location without paying their dues or following their rules. I just hadn't expected them to be so aggressive about it. The next morning, I awoke to find our access road completely blocked. During the night, someone had placed a concrete barrier across the entrance, just behind the newly installed gate. It was the kind used for traffic control at construction sites. Massive, immovable, without heavy equipment. I stood before it, coffee growing cold in my hand, and called the sheriff's office. Deputy Morgan arrived 40 minutes later. He was young, maybe early 30s, with the cautious demeanor of someone who understood the politics of wealth in a small community. "Afraid there's not much I can do, Mr. Winslow," he said after inspecting the barrier. "This is technically HOA property. They're claiming it's part of a scheduled security upgrade. That blocks access to my home. They've provided a walking path around the barrier." He pointed to a narrow dirt trail through the brush. "And they say it's temporary, just until they can get you proper key fobs for the gate. So I'm supposed to park my car on their road and walk a quarter-mile to my house? What about deliveries? Emergency services?" Deputy Morgan looked uncomfortable. "I understand your frustration, sir, but legally this is a civil matter between you and the HOA. I'd suggest consulting with an attorney." As he drove away, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Architectural Committee meeting this afternoon at 2 p.m. Oakwood Clubhouse. Your attendance is requested to resolve access issues." I forwarded it to Catherine with a single question mark. Her response was immediate. "Trap, don't go alone. I'm coming home." Catherine arrived just before noon, still in her tennis clothes from her morning game with friends in our previous neighborhood. She'd brought reinforcements, her former colleague Martin Schaefer, who specialized in real estate law. "This is harassment, plain and simple," Martin said, reviewing our documents. "But fighting an HOA is tricky. They have deep pockets and most courts give them considerable leeway in enforcing their rules." "But we're not members," Catherine insisted. "That's our strongest argument. But they're claiming jurisdiction over the access road, which complicates things." Martin frowned. "Let's start with a title search on that road specifically. If we can prove it's not actually their property, their whole case collapses." The meeting at the Oakwood Clubhouse was exactly the ambush Catherine had predicted. Victoria Harrington and 6 other committee members sat on one side of a gleaming conference table. A single chair waited on the other. "Mrs. Winslow, Mr. Schaefer. We weren't expecting you," Victoria said, not bothering to hide her displeasure. "My wife is still my legal counsel of record," I replied, pulling up additional chairs. And Martin is consulting on this matter. Victoria's smile tightened. As you wish. We're here to discuss your violations of community standards and the terms of your access easement. What followed was a masterclass in bureaucratic intimidation. They presented a thick folder of alleged violations: unauthorized signage, unapproved construction, aesthetic degradation of the Oakwood entrance view. Each violation carried compounding daily fines that already totaled over $5,000. These fines are illegitimate, Catherine interrupted. The Winslows are not HOA members and have no contractual obligation to follow your guidelines. The access road falls under our jurisdiction, countered a thin man introduced as Harold Fitch, the HOA's legal counsel. The easement agreement specifies that use of the road is contingent on compliance with community regulations. Martin leaned forward. I'd like to see that specific language in the easement. Harold slid a document across the table. Paragraph 4, subsection B. Martin and Catherine reviewed it together, their expressions giving nothing away. I knew my wife well enough to recognize she'd found something, but she simply nodded and handed the document back. Now about removing the barrier, I said. I need vehicle access to my property restored immediately. That can be arranged, Victoria replied smoothly, once you've signed our compliance agreement and paid the outstanding fines. I felt my blood pressure rising. That's extortion. It's enforcement of our bylaws, Mr. Winslow. Perhaps you should have researched the property more thoroughly before purchasing. Or perhaps, Catherine interjected, her voice dangerously calm, you should have researched who you were dealing with before starting this war. On the drive home, forced to park at the Oakwood entrance and walk the quarter-mile to our property, Catherine and Martin walked ahead, speaking in low, urgent tones. They're bluffing about something, Catherine told me when we reached the house. That easement language they showed us was oddly specific, almost like it was drafted recently. So what's our next move? Martin closed his portfolio. I'm going to run a complete title search on that access road. Something doesn't add up here. 3 days later, trapped on our property with no vehicle access, we received our first visitor. The concrete barrier remained in place despite Martin's strongly worded legal notice demanding its removal. Our groceries were being delivered by a local service willing to make the quarter-mile trek from the Oakwood entrance to our home at a premium fee, of course. The visitor, surprisingly, was Deputy Morgan, who appeared genuinely troubled as he stood on our front porch. Mr. Winslow, Mrs. Winslow, he began, cap in hand, I wanted to check on you personally. There's been some talk in town about your situation. Catherine invited him in for coffee, her lawyer's instinct for gathering information kicking in. Off the record, Morgan said once seated at our kitchen island. The way they're handling this isn't right. But Oakwood holds a lot of power in this county. The HOA president's husband is golfing buddies with the sheriff, and their treasurer sits on the county board. So we're on our own, I concluded. Not exactly. Morgan shifted uncomfortably. Look, I can't officially get involved, but I did some checking. There's something odd about that access road. The county records show it was part of the original Oakwood development, but it's listed under a different corporate entity, Meridian Holdings, LLC. Catherine and I exchanged glances. The HOA is claiming direct ownership, Catherine said. If it's actually owned by this Meridian Holdings, then they have no authority to restrict your access, Morgan finished. But here's where it gets complicated. Meridian Holdings was the original developer of Oakwood Estates. They went bankrupt about 7 years ago during the housing crisis. Their assets were supposedly transferred to the HOA, but if the transfer wasn't properly recorded for that specific parcel, Catherine said, the lawyer in her fully engaged now, then legally, Meridian still owns it. Morgan nodded. It might be worth looking into. That's all I can say. After he left, Catherine was already on the phone with Martin, the excitement in her voice palpable. This was the Catherine I'd fallen in love with 40 years ago. Brilliant, tenacious, alive with the thrill of the chase. Martin found the same thing, she told me after hanging up. The access road is owned by Meridian Holdings, not the HOA. They've been bluffing this entire time. So what now? Meridian is bankrupt. Bankrupt doesn't mean defunct. Her eyes gleamed. Martin's tracking down the principals. For the first time since the brick had crashed through our window, I felt a glimmer of hope. But my decades in development had taught me that hope without action is just wishful thinking. While Martin handles the legal angle, I'm going to try a different approach, I decided. The next morning, I hiked out to the main road and called a rideshare to take me into town. My destination, the county records office. If Victoria Harrington wanted to play hardball with a retired developer, she was about to learn I knew every inch of this playing field. The records clerk was initially hesitant to help, but my storytelling skills hadn't diminished with retirement. I spun a tale about researching property for a family history project, and soon I was poring over plat maps and corporate filings. What I discovered confirmed Deputy Morgan's suspicions. Meridian Holdings had indeed gone bankrupt, but their corporate structure was complex. The company had been a subsidiary of a larger development corporation, which had fragmented its assets during the bankruptcy proceedings. The access road parcel had fallen through the cracks, never properly transferred to the HOA as intended, but not liquidated either. Most importantly, I found the name of Meridian's former CEO, Lawrence Tanner. A quick internet search revealed that Tanner had relocated to Arizona after the bankruptcy. 3 hours and several phone calls later, I was speaking with him directly. Oakwood was supposed to be my legacy, Tanner told me, the bitterness still fresh in his voice after 7 years. I designed it as an inclusive community with varying price points and mixed-use areas. But the initial investors forced me to upscale everything, and when the market crashed, they left me holding the bag. And the HOA? Victoria Harrington was my project manager before she married into money. She orchestrated the investor revolt that pushed me out, then positioned herself to take control of the HOA when the dust settled. His laugh was hollow. I'm not surprised she's causing problems. Control is her addiction. Mr. Tanner, who currently owns the rights to the Meridian Holdings assets that weren't liquidated? The pause on the line was telling. Technically, I still do. The holding company that owned Meridian is in perpetual Chapter 11 reorganization. Why do you ask? I explained our situation. By the end of the call, Tanner was laughing genuinely. Mr. Winslow, I would be delighted to sell you that access road. Consider it my parting gift to Victoria Harrington. The transaction took 5 days to complete, with Martin working overtime to ensure everything was legally bulletproof. We paid Tanner a fair price, more than the land was technically worth, but far less than its strategic value to us. Throughout this period, the concrete barrier remained in place, and the HOA continued sending daily violation notices, now totaling over $12,000 in fines. On the morning the deal closed, I hired a local construction crew to meet me at the Oakwood entrance. Word had spread through the community about our ongoing battle, and several residents gathered to watch as my crew arrived with a flatbed truck carrying a small excavator. Victoria Harrington appeared within minutes, Harold Fitch at her side. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, as I directed the crew toward the concrete barrier. I handed her an envelope. "Removing an obstruction from my property. This is HOA property. If you damage that barrier, we'll have you arrested. For vandalism." "Actually," I said, savoring the moment, "as of 9:17 this morning, this access road is my property." I gestured to the documents in the envelope. "I've purchased it from Meridian Holdings, the actual owner of record." Harold grabbed the papers, his face paling as he scanned them. "This can't be legal." "It's not only legal, it's recorded with the county as of this morning. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to clear my road." Victoria stepped in front of the excavator. "You can't do this. The HOA has an easement agreement with Meridian." "Had," I corrected. And now you have one with me, under my terms. The excavator operator waited patiently for my signal. Move the barrier, I told the crew. As they worked, I handed Victoria a second envelope. These are the new terms for Oakwood Estates access across my property. Her hands shook as she read the document, her composed facade cracking for the first time. A toll road? You're charging us to use this access point? This is the main entrance to our community. $25 per vehicle, per day, I confirmed. Or residents can take the service entrance on the north side. It adds about 3 miles to the drive, I believe. This is extortion. It's enforcement of my property rights, Ms. Harrington. Perhaps you should have researched who you were dealing with before starting this war. By now, a sizable crowd had gathered. The barrier was being loaded onto the flatbed, and my crew was preparing to remove the gate the HOA had installed. You're making a powerful enemy, Winslow, Victoria hissed, her public mask completely dropped. No, I'm meeting one on equal terms. I gestured to the watching residents. I wonder how they'll feel about their HOA dues increasing to cover toll access, or having to drive miles out of their way every day, especially when they learn it's because you tried to bully the wrong retiree. Harold pulled Victoria aside, whispering urgently. The residents were indeed talking among themselves, several openly questioning the HOA's handling of the situation. That afternoon, Catherine and I sat on our front porch watching as the crew installed our new gate, a simple, tasteful design that complemented the landscape rather than dominating it. Beside it stood a discreet sign, Private Road, Authorized Access Only. You're not really going to charge them $25 per car, are you? Catherine asked, handing me a glass of bourbon. Only Victoria, I replied with a smile. For everyone else, I'm thinking a reasonable annual road maintenance fee, divided equally among the homes. Say $300 per year? The equivalent of one HOA monthly fee. Catherine laughed. You're still a developer at heart, aren't you? Always looking for the win-win. The best victories leave everyone feeling like they've won something, I agreed. Except Victoria. She needs to learn that actions have consequences. My phone buzzed with a text from Martin. Emergency HOA meeting called for tonight. Sources say Victoria's leadership is being questioned. Well done. I showed it to Catherine, who raised her glass in a toast. To retirement, finally getting interesting. To fighting for what's ours, I countered, clinking my glass against hers. As the sun set over our property, fully accessible once more, I reflected on the irony. I'd spent my career creating communities, only to find myself in a war with one in retirement. But perhaps this battle had created something new. A chance for Oakwood Estates to become the kind of community Lawrence Tanner had originally envisioned, before Victoria Harrington's influence corrupted it. The next morning, I installed a new sign at the entrance to our driveway. This one read simply, Winslow Estate, Good Neighbors Welcome. And beneath it, in smaller letters, All others will be told.